Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Hopefully all the IT is working and we're all here together. And if not, please send in a message very quickly so that we know. My name is Denise Honey. I'm an international tax partner with Pitcher Partners in Melbourne. On behalf of the Women of IFA Network event and my fellow in Australia representative Amanda Kazakis, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's WIN event. IFA is committed to a dynamic and diverse international tax community, and the focus of WIN is to encourage the participation of women in IFA's leadership structures and events. Today I'm delighted to be joined by two amazing and inspiring women, Sam Reinhardt and Rebecca Saint. Sam is currently First Assistant Secretary in the Treasury Department of the Federal Government in the Group Corporate and International Tax Division. Sam has a wealth of experience in the tax and policy space, with executive experiences ranging from the Henry Review to FIRB to advising multiple governments on tax policy matters. Rebecca is currently Deputy Commissioner for Public Groups at the Australian Taxation Office. In this role, Rebecca is responsible for overseeing tax administration and compliance for public and multinational groups. Rebecca works closely with key stakeholders on consultation matters. Today, Rebecca and Sam have been kind enough to share with us their observations on policy making and leadership in the international tax space in Australia. Thanks so much to both of you for being here today. Now, I thought we might just get started talking a little bit about your careers. You've both been very successful and have had some amazing roles. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little more about your current role and some of the high points in your careers to date.
Rebecca, would you like to go first?
No, I'm happy for you to go first, Sam. You kick off.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm a bit sad I can't see anyone, so I feel like I'm talking into the ether, but hopefully at some point I'll get to meet some of you who are online. I'm, as Denise said, I'm the head of corporate and international tax in Treasury. It covers a pretty diverse range of issues. It's everything from tax treaties where we're ramping up our work in that space, to the digital tax work of the OECD, to corporate tax generally, and lots of kind of smaller and larger measures that sit in the corporate tax space. It's a really fascinating area. I've only been there for 6 months, but it's great fun. It's got really good people. I'm quite sad because it's a role where I saw a great opportunity to engage with the tax community and to kind of bring in views from outside Treasury. I've managed a little bit of that, but it is a lot harder in the COVID environment. As all of you would know, it's not quite the same as kind of me heading to Melbourne or to Sydney or around Canberra and just reaching out and chatting to people. So that's kind of on my list of things I'd like to do more of, and maybe I just need to be a bit more innovative and think about ways of doing that online. But yeah, that's a little bit about my role at the moment.
Thanks. So as Denise said, I'm Deputy Commissioner of Public Groups in the Public Groups and International Business line. I've been in the role for about 2.5 years, coming up to 3 years at the end of this year. I think, you know, for me, it's a great privilege to do this role. Not many people have had the opportunity to run the large market compliance program before me, and you know, I'm certainly very honoured to be the first female that actually has been appointed as Deputy Commissioner of this line. So I think it definitely is one of the highlights, and to, you know, inherit a group and of people that have just done such fabulous work in international tax and for the Australian tax system over the last 5 years through task force in particular is something that I'm really happy and proud to be involved in. I think, you know, the opportunities that investments that government's made into the ATO and into the large market program in particular has really allowed us to become global leaders in the way that we think about tax administration. I think it's one thing to want your administrators to make sure that corporates and taxpayers pay the right amount of money, but you actually have to invest to have an enforcement program that delivers that as well. And I think, you know, we're very fortunate that we've been given good policy frameworks, but then also been given the good investment to be able to deliver on that. I think with that, you know, really come the opportunity to lead and innovate the way we think about compliance, the way we help business to get it right and not need post-lodgement compliance, and then, you know, how we help business be transparent to the community and contribute to the broader increase of transparency and community confidence more generally in the health of the tax system. So I think, you know, I've really enjoyed being in this role. Like I said, it's been a real privilege and honour, and it's one that, you know, I enjoy every day. I think even within Australia, obviously there's great things to do, but the doors it's open to deal with people in other jurisdictions, you know, has been fabulous as well. I deal with counterparts across the globe, predominantly in you know, the UK and the US, quite consistently, and I think, you know, the common feedback of engagement through them is how well respected we are across the tax profession in Australia. So I think it's something that, you know, it sets us in for a very good discussion tonight, because I know there's a lot of views and certainly a lot of intellectual capital in the discussions, and happy to take obviously questions from people in the audience about their experience in the tax profession as well.
You're both so passionate about this area and your roles. It's just amazing to see. In terms of, we talked about, I suppose, policy and leadership, which I suppose in many ways are kind of inextricably linked. So in your view, coming from, you know, such senior roles in different organisations, what do you see as sort of the key skills that people need for productive leadership?
Do you want me to go first this time, Sam?
Yeah, go for it, Rebecca.
Look, and it's, you know, the problem with these questions, your answers are always so cliche, I think. So maybe, you know, it may sound a bit cliche, my answer, but I think there's a few factors for me. So, you know, I sort of think about, you know, what do you want to see in your leaders? And it's probably likely that that's what your staff want to see in you. So for me, you know, what are the attributes that are really important to me? So one's around authenticity. So I need to know that I'm being very genuine in leadership. I need, you know, that comes with that comes building trust. You need people to be able to trust you, both the people that work with you, but stakeholders that you need to influence as well. They need to know that you're engaging genuinely in those conversations, and that, you know, what you're telling them can be trusted advice. So I think that, you know, you have to really work at building that authenticity and trust over time. I think having very clear and consistent vision is something that I find really important as well. People have to understand what you're about and where you're headed. And I think if you lack that clarity, that can really impact overall what execution looks like as well. So that's at a high level, you know, the sort of things, just some of the things. I know there's a lot more than that that I tend to think about and sort of focus on. But Sam, I'm sure you got others as well.
I absolutely agree. It's sort of authenticity and vision. I guess some of the things that I've really admired in the leaders who I've looked up to are kind of intelligence, and I'd call that more being smart, and it's kind of understanding the fundamentals around an issue, being able to pull it apart, being able to kind of understand the broader implications, because often we look at a problem and you can look at a problem as just the issue that's in front of you, or you can look at it in a much broader way and say, how does it link to other parts of the tax system? How does it link to other parts of the kind of policy environment or the economy more broadly? And that's really important in Treasury, but I think it's really important more broadly. You need people who, to have a vision, you have to be able to look more broadly. So some of the things that these are kind of smaller, but things that really matter to me. So I think it's really important to be able to help people to learn, and to do that you have to embrace failure to some extent. And I think this is a really interesting area where it's quite a hard thing to do. It's about kind of giving people enough space and enough scope to run their own issues, being able to delegate, being able to push down, being able to give people the authority to take control of their work and their jobs, but then also to provide that backstop to people to say, you know, when you're unsure, come and have a chat with me, and then find ways to kind of enable people to kind of experiment and explore, and to learn. And that really is the trickier thing. It's a very tricky thing as a leader to say, how do we learn from, oh my gosh, that was a disaster. What are we going to do about that? And it's so important. Really good leaders don't say who stuffed up. They say, gosh, what were our systems like? What do we need to do to change them? So for me, that's a really big part of how you get the best out of the team. The other thing is, I guess, for me, kind of just decency and really kind of engaging with people and making sure that whoever you're working with, you understand what they can bring to the table and you give them the opportunity to bring that to the table. And it really is about kind of recognising different people's styles, whether it be kind of taking more time to make their point or actually needing to do things in a written form. It does become more tricky as you become more senior. You have less time and you frankly just don't have the patience to deal with people who can't deal with things quickly. But you need to pull back and kind of go, okay, what is this person bringing to me? Why is it that they want me to listen? What do I get out of this? So what issue do I learn from this? So that's something that is quite important for me. But obviously something I need to work on, given I like to get things done.
I think that's a very common failing. So thanks. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting insight. Rebecca, we talked about this recently, but I suppose when we talk about leadership in, I suppose, more generally, and particularly in the international tax community, what do you see? Do you have any observations about the diversity of leadership that you see around you in the community?
Yeah, look, if I look at leadership within the ATO, and I think, maybe I was mentioning this to you the other day, Denise, that I look across the client experience group, and every one of our client experiences is currently headed by a female deputy commissioner. That surely has to be a first. So, I feel like I'm surrounded by, quite a lot of females at work, or at least in that context. I then even look into our law line, and our chief tax counsel is female as well. So certainly, high levels of representation through those particular positions. I think when I look outside, perhaps I don't see the same level of diversity in senior positions, certainly in the private sector. Although I'll let Sam comment on Treasury, because I think you're not doing too bad in Treasury either, Sam. But but if I think about counterparts at Big Four, and certainly who I come in regular contact with, I probably don't see the same diversity at senior leadership levels. Now, whether that's actually what's happening on the ground or whether that's just a function of the people I'm dealing with every day is not so clear to me. That being said, I do think that there are still some fabulous female senior tax professionals out in the private sector. It's not that I don't deal with any. It's just certainly that perhaps I don't deal with as many in comparison to their male counterparts. I'm sure, Denise, you might have some observations about whether that's a fair reflection about what you're actually seeing on the ground. I'm not sure.
Look, I think it's an area of focus over in the private sector. I think my take certainly is that that firms are really trying to develop that more and more, and I think it's in a way part of what I sort of wanted to take away from today's discussion. I mean, the tax office seems to have done so well in that area, and it's about trying to mine that, to say, well, what is it that you're doing that seems to be, particularly of late, the last few years. I'm not sure if you've seen it more as a changeover over a period of time. I'm not sure if it was like that, say, 10 years ago. But what is it that you can teach the rest of us about doing that a little better?
Do you know what I think the ATO does really well, particularly in the corporate tax space, right? We were very deliberate a few years ago when we set up Task Force. We had a huge recruitment challenge in front of us. So we got significant funding from the government. We had to go and recruit from the market, right? Big build. And we actually quite deliberately, as one of our target groups, targeted young female professionals, because we had an offering to, well, we felt we had a very good offering, which was great work conditions, fabulous work. And in fact, you know, in comparison to private firms, we would have the highest quality work in the country coming through what we do every day, plus access to work that you couldn't do in the private sector. But you balance that with flexibility and conditions that certainly at the time you couldn't have got in the private sector. Of course, the trade-off is a bit about pay, but you know, what we understood from what young female professionals in particular were looking for, many of them were moving into that stage of their life where they were looking to have, or already did, or looking to have children. And so many were actually saying, well, I don't want the pressure of billing. I don't want to have to worry about that. But I still want to maintain my presence in the workforce, and I certainly still want to have access to high quality work and engagement. And we actually brought in quite an increase in number through that process. Now, clearly it wasn't the only target of our recruitment program, but I actually think we did pick up like quite a few through that program. And I know certainly in PGI that's allowed us to build out our diversity numbers significantly. And we have, you know, pretty good diversity. Like, you know, we have, you know, I don't have any concerns about our female participation rates in our line. I think more broadly, I think, you know, not dissimilar to that, I think the organisation's always been well known for flexibility. So I think, you know, other lines would have similar types of draws of why females are finding it quite attractive to work to the ATO, and, you know, just the ability also, I think that broader policy setting of lots of people, you know, people want to come and contribute to the community. And I think for some reason, females in particular are drawn to that as an ideal. And so I think, you know, certainly many that I've spoken to that have come across later in careers, that has been a big driver of why they've made the switch over into the public sector. So yeah, so I think, you know, that's certainly I think why we're seeing some of the results we are now. But, you know, it has been the result of a very deliberate policy, and, you know, we still focus very heavily on diversity across the organisation, as all organisations do. And, you know, we do have very targeted policies how to improve those balance.
Maybe I could jump in and talk a little bit about Treasury, but also about what I think has been influential in the change to a kind of greater representation of women, but also more diverse employees generally. So when I joined Treasury, I was one of a couple of graduates in my year. I think maybe there was 20%. So 4 out of 20 graduates were female, which was an absolute record number of women at the time. I had a couple of really impressive women, senior women who I could look to. One of them who is actually Marianne Marakovich, who's my deputy now. But that made a huge difference, just having a few women who you could look to and say, they are people who I can aspire to be like. And I think that's really important in an organisation. Unless you can see people who are like you, it's hard to imagine that you could actually be senior one day. So that's a big part of it. Very early on, we actually did have some senior women. We made an active decision to look at what the barriers were and what we could do to progress women. So that was sort of maybe a decade or 15 years ago, we started to do a lot more of that. We had senior men who looked to appoint senior women. So we now have 4 deputies in Treasury, I think out of 5 or 6. Out of 5, and that's really important. Like, the secretary and the leaders set the tone of an organisation. They determine what and who progresses, and it comes to an issue which you may be planning to ask us about later, Denise, but I'll jump into it, which is the issue of merit appointment. So I'm a huge fan of, I think you only appoint people on merit. That's otherwise your organisation has plenty of issues. But I think there's something more fundamental around what is merit and what are you looking for when you appoint people. When it comes to this issue of, you tend to feel most comfortable with people who are most like you. You tend to gravitate to people who share your opinions, who share your perspective. And that's great in a social setting. But if you want an organisation that really kind of is innovative and has new ideas and pushes boundaries and test ideas properly, then you need to have more than just carbon copies of the same sort of person, and you need to actively look for people who think differently or come from different perspectives. Now, it doesn't mean you want people who are, you know, kind of wacky, but it does mean that you can't just choose the people who you are most comfortable with. It means that for leaders, you need to think about what is merit and what am I willing to, what am I looking for in a person? Am I looking for someone who can offer exactly the same things as I can, in which case you haven't really benefited much from having them there? Or are you after people who can add a different angle and dimension to things? So I think there's a lot of self-reflection for all of us as we think about filling roles. And when we do that a bit more proactively, we get better outcomes. We get more diverse kind of employees and often happier employees as well. So that would be my thoughts on it as well. Oh, and one more thing which I found really interesting and others will find interesting too. When we did the self-reflection in Treasury, we did it in the way Treasury always does these things. We looked at all the data and worked out that there was a particular point that women tended to do less well than men, and some of that was women stepping out of the workforce or working part-time. One of the things that was really interesting is we do appraisals and we tell people how we think they're performing, and we pay them in part based on that. And we found that women tended to assess other women more harshly than men. So there's a lesson for all of us, and certainly one I took out of it. So be aware of that when you're assessing your peers and juniors, particularly if they're women.
And that's really interesting, Sam. I wonder what drives that. Do you think, because I actually do have a theory that, you know, senior women, we're all quite self-critical of ourselves. Are we really just playing that back on other females? Is that what's going on, or do you think it's something else?
I do wonder, and there is a bit of, I think it's easy to go, oh, you know, you just got to slog through and get there. And I do suspect, though, we do tend to kind of, you know, we're harsh in judging other women. And it's a bit hard to know why, but it's worth being aware of so that we don't do it unintentionally, or intentionally for that matter too.
Look, I think I was going to ask you about merit because the concept of merit is something that I find really, really interesting, and I think that what you're saying, and tell me if I'm reading it wrong, is that merit's still a good and worthwhile concept, but we have to think about what criteria, how are we setting the criteria for what looks like merit. And Rebecca, I don't know if that's something that you've thought about at the tax office with all of your diversity success around how do you judge merit? What are some of the criteria in terms of people being successful in progressing through their career?
And look, I think it's incredibly difficult. Clearly, you know, coming from a bureaucracy, we have fixed criteria about how we assess merit, you know, and we can seek to influence that, and we do, but I think at the end of the day that they're rather quite fixed criteria. I think when it comes down to it, though, they're really trying to call out some key themes. And I think it's those themes that we really want to see when assessing merit. And some of them are quite difficult, right? Like, how do you assess, and to move into senior leadership roles, how do you assess things like your capacity to lead people, your ability to influence key stakeholders across both your organisation, but beyond, other agencies, government? You know, how do you assess those? How do you assess somebody's ability to make good judgment calls? Right. But I think fundamentally that's what these criteria are all trying to draw out. And, you know, we have certainly through the formal promotion exercises, you know, that's why people are asked to write examples about, well, tell us how you've addressed these. I think it is also why many externals find it difficult to come across into government agencies at quite senior levels, particularly, you know, in pockets of the ATO, like compliance, engagement, for example, so where I am, or at quite senior, some of the quite senior law roles as well. And I think that's because in the profession, people are used to dealing with quite, you know, you're well regarded because of your technical skills, right? You're a technical specialist. You might know certain parts of the Act really well. You might be great at international tax structuring. So maybe you know a few parts of the Act, and you can probably sell a bit of business, sell some business and, drum up some marketing campaigns as well. But at the end of the day, that's only part of your job as a regulator, right? Like, yep, you got to be good at tax, but you also need to know how you can pull different levers to get different behavioural responses in the market, right? And you've got to be able to show that you can use your leadership to be able to influence others to pull the levers for you. So I might try and influence Sam to pull a legislative lever for me, for example. I might try and get ASIC to do something, or APRA, or whoever it might be, or even, the Corporate Tax Association. It doesn't matter. But you've got to think about who are all the players in the system. Have you got the skills to be able to influence? Well, one, make the judgment calls about what should be doing, and then can you influence those when you need to? So I think bringing that all back, having like 5 fixed criteria to be able to demonstrate this, to step into assistant commissioner roles into the ATO, and to be able to demonstrate that in 700 words is really challenging for people. To be able to take all of that and put it in. But I think it's about, just being able to try and find one, that you've got that broader understanding of system and who's playing what role in the system, and then being able to show that you've been able to execute it on it as well.
So in terms of merit, I guess on a really simple, practical way, I'd say, if you sat 2 people down and got, a 90% from someone and an 85 for another, you'd say that you take the person who got 90% in the test. But it then comes to a lot of those soft skills that are much harder to assess, that we need to think more about taking into account. The only qualifier I'd add to that is I do genuinely think that women are judged more harshly in the way that they behave and the way that they project themselves. So maybe I'm slightly biased. So one of my previous roles was as Julia Gillard's tax and fiscal policy advisor. So I've kind of seen how the media responds to a female prime minister right up close. And sort of the judgments that were made about her in terms of, what's she wearing today? Has she put weight on? Were very personalised. And I think the judgments of senior women, it is a much harder line. So, if you're too pushy, you're aggressive. If you're too quiet, you're passive. So I'm optimistic about how women progress and how we kind of change those things. But I do think it is a slow process, and we're a long way off being finished. So I actually think it is harder for women to kind of tread that line on contributing well, being a leader, driving outcomes, but not being too aggressive. And so yeah, it's a tricky path for women still, I think.
And just adding on to what you said, Sam, the other observation I would add is I think women that think that merit is all about what we do. So I'll just work harder and I'll perform better, and therefore I'll be seen as more meritorious, right? That is not true. And I think all you got to do is look around and see how well male counterparts actually network, and how much time they actually invest in building those relationships across the organisations, right? And I think that that's one area that I don't see females doing that as much, including myself, to be honest. So, share a bit about me. That's not the favourite part of my job. Like, I like spending time with people, but I have to set myself goals of, okay, I've got to really focus on my external relationship management and building networks, and, because you need all of that to build the trust and confidence that I talked about earlier. And I think that that's something that we all need to think about all the time. And I think probably even need to be taught at a much younger age. Go out there and build networks, stay in contact with people, and, just, all around, just don't be afraid to reach out when you need things from those people either, or when you can share things.
Well, I think that, I mean, there's some wonderful advice in there on that front, and I think particularly the part about not just putting your head down and working harder, because I think that's certainly something that I have observed a lot, and I think, and I'll put my hand up as well. I mean, that's my instinctive response also, and so it is something you've got to. I think that's really really insightful. We've talked a lot about leadership and sort of, I suppose, again, that the connection between leadership and consultation. And Rebecca, you were saying how important, particularly in your role, and I'm guessing Sam in your role as well, it's about influencing and consulting and working with people towards outcomes and policy development and enforcement and all cooperative compliance and all of those things. So when people are consulting, or when you're consulting on whether it's developing a policy, I mean, you must see all sorts of different approaches in doing that. What do you think is the most effective approach, and does that vary a little bit to the circumstances that might be in play?
I think it can, but I think honestly, I think it's about the personality involved quite often, about how effective consultation can be. Where I see it really effective is when the people contributing to consultation are doing it for the right motivation, right? So they're doing it because they actually want to help develop the best product, the best part of the system, whatever it is we're consulting on. And, that they're in the room because they've got a genuine desire to reach the best outcome. And that, by best outcome, is something that's good for the system. Right? And those people are able to put away their own particular agenda, whether that be because you're in a corporate and you might have some sort of tax motivation or tax agenda of your own, or equally whether you're an advisor and all you're really trying to do is monetize some sort of inside knowledge that you've got, and you're going to go to market before anybody else, and you know more about it because you're in consultation already. I think they're the wrong motivators to come in, and we can tell, right? We can tell. It is very transparent to us. Even when we receive nameless feedback, quite often we can pick where it's come from, right? Because you can tell when people are pushing agendas, and you can pick it most times, but equally you can pick those that are genuinely engaging and, for the right motivation. And I think they're the people that you tend to invite back. They're the people that you'll go to when, you've got those really complex questions that you're like, should I go and ask somebody? Do I really want to consult? You go, well, I've actually built trust in this group. I'll go and ask them. And so I think there's that genuine building of that relationship and contribution going forward. And I think, those people hopefully get a lot out of it as well. Like, they get they get that good feeling of knowing that they've contributed to something that's good for the system.
Yeah, so I guess the only thing I'd add is often we'll get people who are quite clear that what is of interest to them representing their business or businesses that they work with. And that is actually fine. Just to kind of, this is the issue that's going to affect this business, and this is how, and this is why we care about it. It's that context of, I can see where you're trying to get to, and here's some other thoughts around the policy direction. So it's, I guess my perspective, it's okay to be self-interested, but you can't hide that, and it's almost better not to.
Yeah, I
to
think
be
that's
upfront
right.
And these are the issues. This is what we're worried about, and here's some thoughts I've got about it generally. So it's not that we don't want to hear the self-interested stuff. It's just that it's if it's sort of disguised in a whole lot of other, in a kind of pretense of caring about the broader system, it's not very persuasive, and it's usually just a bit irritating, and it often misses the mark. So self-interest, fine, but clarity around that, clarity of message, and an understanding of what the bigger picture is makes contributions much more persuasive as well. Understanding that we're all professionals, and we're all keen to engage and understand what the issues are. So dealing with people on a kind of level playing field approach is really important. And I say that as a Treasury person where Treasury has for years been notoriously bad at dealing with, I'm not so sure about the private sector. I think we're actually pretty good at dealing outside of government, but we have had a terrible reputation for dealing with people in government. because there was a kind of snobbishness about working in Treasury, and I think we've got beyond that, but it's something that I think is quite important because it was very misguided and very unhelpful. But it works both ways. So everyone has to respect everyone else and kind of treat people with decency and kind of share ideas and try and understand where others are coming from as well.
And I mean, sometimes I get asked the question, you know, how do people get more involved in the policy process? Sometimes it does feel a little bit like a closed shop in terms of, you know, the usual suspects being involved in consultation. You know, what observations do you have on that for people who, you know, genuinely want to make that contribution, but perhaps just, you know, haven't been in the right place at the right time, and how do they reach out to get involved?
Becca will have a much better answer, but I'll just give my main tip on this would be, when you find an opportunity, take it and contribute well, and then you're more likely to be involved in other things as well, and you kind of build on these things through your career. But yeah, Rebecca, you'll probably have a more practical response.
No, well, I think that's a very good suggestion. I agree with that. The other thing I would say is, we don't know who wants to be involved in consultation if you don't tell us, right? Like, we can't just guess. So, you know, if you're interested, you know, put your hand up. You know, and there's plenty of avenues to be involved. Now, whoever all the secretariats or all the stewardship groups are about to kill me, because there's going to be a tsunami of emails probably going, can I get on the group? But the ATO has a huge number of consultation forums. It's on our website how many forums we have, like standing committees with externals on them, and we do rotate them, right? So we've actually made sure that all the group leads are actually sticking to the rotation policies. So now, you know, like I run the large business stewardship group, and, you know, we'll have another turnover of members at the end of the year. And, you know, do you know how I pick who goes next? Well, I have an external co-chair. She may provide me some suggestions, but ultimately as chair, it's my call. I go out to my assistant commissioners and go, hey, do you know any corporate tax people or advisors who you think would be good on this group? I go and ask them. I survey around, who do I know in the market that has, you know, expressed interest in the tax system, and then we look at the list. So I think, you know, we are always looking for people that are willing to make that contribution at that level. But again, if, you know, it's much easier for us to identify those people if you've stuck your hand up and told someone you're interested. Beyond that, there's obviously other opportunities. We're always consulting on public advice and guidance. That's a very good place to start if you want to sort of say, look, I can make a valuable contribution. Put a submission in on some of the advice and guidance. It doesn't need to be a 30-page submission. Just even a submission that says, hey, you did a good job this time. We like those submissions. We welcome those as well. Top of the list. It was good. But, you know, if you just want to put one on a discrete point, that's fine, right? So just look for those little opportunities, and then that will connect you with the people that have done that guide or, you know, piece of guidance, and then you can build those relationships as well.
So don't be shy.
Yeah, don't be shy. One thing I'd add that is sort of tangentially related to this is, I found in my career that if I just put my head down and work on what I'm doing, that's great. That is actually really important to do that, but not just putting your head up and building networks. Look for opportunities to get involved in something that is outside your immediate area of work, whether it's a corporate issue, whether in this case it's kind of being involved in policy development, the ATO. And it's those things that often offer you the best opportunities in the future, because someone will say, oh, I remember Denise, she was involved in that issue. Yeah, she was really good and had lots to contribute. So you kind of build networks outside your immediate environment, which are really helpful.
Yeah.
So that I'd encourage you from that perspective too.
And I agree with that. And particularly as you know, through government, or, you know, certainly in the ATO, I'm assuming it's the same for you, Sam, quite often senior appointments, it's not just your boss making the decision, right? Other groups get input, as you know, there'll be representatives from other groups on panels making those decisions. Now, if they don't know who you are and they don't have visibility of you, it's very hard for them to be able to make a decision to say, well, yeah, actually, we think that, you know, that's a good decision, right? Like, you know, so I think you do need to think beyond those groups. You know, they will also think about, well, what's the name like in the market, you know, what's the, you know, all of those sort of things that go with it. So I think it goes back to the whole networking stuff we were talking about before, Sam. You know, find networks that are constructive, that, you know, don't just think very siloed about it. I do have a story that was on this as well, sort of similar sort of vein. I at one part of my career, when I came back to the ATO, so I started at ATO, when I worked at a law firm, came back, I was put in charge of running some audit teams, and I spent about 4 or 5 years auditing banks. Anyway, decided after 5 years it was enough, and I moved over and headed up the ATO's energy and resources strategy. Oh, I was an E or 2 actually. I wasn't the lead at that time. I take that back. But at the time I moved, I had all these people say to me, oh my God, if we knew you would ever have moved out of audit, we would have offered you a job ages ago. Right? But it's because I'd never told anybody. Right? And it just goes to that point of, you know, just because you're just sitting there doing your work, you think that someone will come and tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, I've got this great opportunity for you. It doesn't happen. Like, you've got to make sure that you're having those conversations, that people know that you're willing to take those opportunities, because otherwise, you know, they're just not going to think of you when they come across their desk.
Excellent point. And that was my experience when I first stepped into the senior executive service, or before that. I remember saying to my boss, oh, I think I'd like to go for this next level. And that was when I had a very young baby, or a few of them actually. And he kind of went, oh, okay. And his immediate reaction was not, absolutely, we'll get you there. It was surprised that I wanted to get there. But within the next 6 months, he had done everything he could to set me up to go to that next level. But again, you sort of have to articulate where you want to be and what you want to go, partly because people will make assumptions about you as a woman, not intentionally even sometimes, but they'll make assumptions about what your aspirations might be. And if you aren't clear about what they are, then you might find that impacts on your ability to move up.
And I think it goes to that broader point of, you know, not leaving your career in somebody else's hands. It's about, you know, and we often say this to people, you know, when they talk about training and opportunity and, you know, diversifying their type of work. Well, you know, you need to put your hand up. Everybody has wonderful intentions, but everyone gets busy and has their own things they're focusing on. And whereas if you put your hand up and say, oh, I'd like this exposure, I'd like a bit of help, 9 out of 10 people will fall over themselves to help you, but you've got to put your hand up. So I think that's, yeah, I certainly see that. That really resonates. I suppose we sort of talked about the combination of policy and leadership and consultation, and I'm conscious that the hour's gone really quite quickly. I thought I just had, I suppose, one additional policy question I did want to try and address, if we've got some time, is, you know, in terms of you know, policy debates in the future. Now, I understand, of course, we can't be talking about confidential policy and things like that, but, you know, in a broad sense, you know, what do you see as some of the key sort of policy areas in the international tax space that, you know, that we as a you know, I suppose, area of specialty need to be sort of watching and participating in, hopefully?
I'll dive in first, and then Rebecca, pass to you. So one of the big pieces of work that my team has been involved in since I've joined is the digital tax, well, so-called digital tax, not really just digital tax anymore, but the OECD, the next stage of the BEPS process, so Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Pillar 1 being the ability to tax, for countries to tax on the basis of where consumers are, and Pillar 2 being the global minimum tax. I think both of those are going to be incredibly significant, or have the potential to be incredibly significant going forward. So the Pillar 2 work, which is the global minimum tax, it's going to be a really big deal to implement it. For countries like Australia, where we have a headline tax of 30%, a global minimum tax could potentially make the differential between low tax jurisdictions and Australia much smaller. So that could have quite a big impact for Australia if it's implemented effectively. So I'm be fascinated to see how that plays out. We obviously will have a lot of work to do on how that's put in place in Australia, how other countries put it in place, what it means for a lot of our other international tax arrangements, whether it's CFC arrangements or other integrity measures. So that I think will be a fascinating area. Pillar 1, because it's such a fundamental change in the way that we apply taxation, I think it's got a long way to play out and how that interacts with the actual tax systems of countries around the world. So again, I think those things are huge. I think it's a really fun area to be involved in. So whether in government or in the market, and I think for the private sector kind of being and tax practitioners being involved in that discussion is going to be quite important. And because it is an international discussion with, I think now up to 140 countries signed up, it's a really it's a really hard thing to influence as a single country, but it's really important for us to be involved in that detail and the implementation. So.
It's hard to top that. Like that's absolutely going to be the biggest international tax issue that we're going to be probably grappling with for the next 20 years, I reckon, Sam. So, Sam and Treasury will do their part, and no doubt then we'll spend the next 10 years trying to work out what it all means. But look, there is a lot of work, and in all seriousness, we obviously work very closely with Treasury, and I think, in fact, I've heard Marianne say quite publicly before that, for that reason, the ATO is probably a much better place than some of the other tax administrators globally, because we have been working so closely with Treasury. I don't want to, you can't underestimate or understate how difficult the task is in terms of implementation, but, we're putting all the steps in place, and I'm sure we'll do a great job, as we do with everything, along with Treasury, so and corporates. But just to reiterate Sam's point, get involved in the consultation and get involved early, right at the point that you can influence stuff. It's really hard to change things after legislation's been put in place and decisions have been made already. So you have a window of opportunity. I do encourage you to use it. I think the other thing that I would add, and I think it is going to continue to have a lot of global attention, is around transparency. I don't think it's going away. Australia obviously did implement transparency or corporate transparency ahead of many other countries in the world, but I think now there's other jurisdictions that have actually surpassed what Australia introduced. But I think importantly, the US is starting to think about, we're seeing US multinationals in particular starting to think about where they have to move. And I think that's going to be the big mover in global transparency and shifting and perhaps having a more unified regime. So I think that is one area that I expect that we will continue to see a lot of development over the coming years. And it'll be interesting, Sam, to see how that progresses and develops in parallel to the Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 at the same time as well.
Great. Now, I'm probably taking an IT risk here in seeing if anybody has any questions, because normally one does this in a room, but if people have questions and we can get the Q&A to work, we might have time for one or maybe two questions. So this shows a core skill these days, which is adaptability, isn't it?
Indeed. We've all had that tested over the last 18 months, Denise.
So I'm going to take a slight risk here, at the risk of overloading my inbox on my team. If there's people who are interested in kind of reaching out, and I suspect Rebecca would say the same, we are also happy to chat with people, or, if it becomes too many questions, then what I'll do is suggest that someone from my team get back and have a chat, because it's useful for us to hear, even if it's just things like, how do you kind of progress in Treasury? What has Treasury done about women in leadership? Or how do I get involved in policy debates? We're super happy to take questions afterwards too.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's very kind. That's very kind, and I think you will have people take you up on that. I'm quite sure. I mean, this is also being recorded, so I think you might have some people take you up on that on a deferred basis. So you've been very brave there. Thank you, Sam.
And
so look, I can't. Oh, here we go.
Denise, we've got 2 questions if you can see those. Yeah.
Oh, great. I can only see the.
So we've got Craig. He's just asked, as a male, now in a more mentor role, what can he do to support women in progressing in their careers?
That's a great question. Can I give 2 answers? So the first one, I'll give an example. So when I was the head of foreign investment division on the FIRB board in Treasury, I used to go along to a lot of meetings with companies, and they would all be males, generally, foreign investors. And I had 2 guys who, in that case, were junior to me, and we would walk in the room and they would always flank me, and they would always defer to me, and they would always make me feel like I was the leader. So that is a really important. So I know that, Michael, you were sort of talking, how do I help people? Sorry, was it Michael? I'm not sure I picked up the name of the person asking the question.
I think it was Craig on that one.
Craig, okay, Craig. But as a leader, kind of helping people, women who progress, the other thing I would say, other example I would give is women benefit hugely from having champions. And I've benefited a great deal from people who tapped me on the shoulder and said, you should think about going and doing this. So things like the Henry Tax Review Secretariat, was working part-time again. I had a small child, had no wouldn't have thought to go and work on a task force that was going to be extremely busy. And my then deputy or senior manager said, I think you should put your name in for this. And in fact, I've suggested your name to go on this secretariat. So being a champion is really important. Yeah, that is a big thing I'd suggest, and nudging people or even giving them a push, because we're not always as confident as we should be about our abilities. So that can be really helpful.
I 100% agree. I would have said exactly the same thing, Sam. I've got a very supportive boss, and I think, what Jeremy, I've worked with him for probably 5 or 6 years now. What he's very good at, I think, is identifying areas where he knows that I can deliver things that perhaps I wouldn't have said myself I could have done. And there's no question, it's just, you're going to go do that. Right, or I'm putting you up for this, and it's just that unwavering confidence that you're going to be able to deliver, I think. And you go, well, gee, I really respect him. He thinks I can deliver this. I must be able to deliver this. So I think it's just having that really solid, grounded support that's really worked for me. And I think with that support, and I've then been empowered to go and do all the work myself and do those things. I've really surprised myself what I have been able to do and achieve. Some quite difficult tasks and challenges along the way as well. Things like the first practical compliance guideline. I developed the thinking around that and delivered that. That was really quite challenging. Some of the biggest litigation and settlements that we've done through task force, I did those type of things. And then, of course, stepping into the deputy commissioner role and, everything that comes with that, and the public visibility, etc. But I think it's just knowing that, you've got someone there who, identifies that you can do those things, and really, as Sam says, gives you the nudge to do that. I think the other thing I would say is, sometimes you do just have to listen and help as well. I think that's a good thing, but, call out when things don't go well too. So it's not all just helping.
I think we've just got one more question, because we started a few minutes late, so I might be cheeky and ask the one more question. So the question here is, I hesitate to ask, but studies suggest that tax aggression is fueled by aggressiveness on the part of company executives. Could more women in senior corporate roles change this, do you think?
Well, maybe Treasury have some data on that, Sam, that we should investigate. Look, I don't know the specific answer of that, but you know, if we make an observation around corporate tax managers, we, you know, and this is a huge generalization, and I have no data to support this, but I can't really think of too many. I'd probably count them on one hand, companies where we're in major disputes that have female corporate tax managers. Now, I don't know if that's just coincidental or not. You know, but on the flip side, through our Justified Trust program, who do I see as the biggest fans of the ideas around getting low assurance? They like, you know, green zones in PCGs typically are the female tax managers. And so, you know, I do have a bit of a question as to whether there is a bit of a theme of, is there some different level of conservatism or, as you put it, Denise, aggression, depending on gender through these roles? Now, of course, that's only ever, you know, what I've just said is a very clear generalization and more questions than anything else. But it would be interesting if somebody would do a study on it to test some of these things.
So I don't have any data on it, so I'm not prepared to say it would definitely be the case. I actually would throw into the mix whether there is a changing acceptance of kind of tax avoidance and minimisation generally across the community. And I certainly know there are studies around intergenerational differences on tolerance, certainly on environmental issues, partly on taxation as well. So I wouldn't be surprised if actually there's a bigger difference in intergenerational approaches to these issues than there is on gender, just to throw another dimension in there. So I do think attitudes are changing. It might be partly gender, it might be other factors as well.
I agree, and culture plays a huge role as well, Sam. So I would also say conservatism, you know, certain jurisdictions, you know, where head companies are located, there's definitely a correlation around the prevalence of tax aggression depending on home jurisdiction as well. So I think you're right, there are a few factors at play. It's not just one. So it's difficult to call.
Thank you so much to both of you for your insights. I think it's been a really frank discussion, and clearly, you know, all the different things that you've done in your careers. I mean, you've learned a lot along the journey, and you seem very keen to learn even more, which is wonderful. So thank you so much for making the time. I think everyone on the call, even though unfortunately we can't see everyone and we're not all in the same room, would really have appreciated you know, your generosity with your time in talking to us today. And I'm sure you will get some emails in your inboxes with your generous offer for people to reach out and suggestions around the networking. But I certainly enjoyed it. I think yeah, listening to, you know, from someone in the profession, I suppose in private, you know, practice, you know, listening to those insights about, you know, the tax office and Treasury and how to better engage, I think, you know, that's certainly been a learning for me. So thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Denise. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Denise.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.